Hey kids, howdy and welcome once again to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. We are rounding out, almost ending the month of October.
I can't believe that. I feel like we
Don't get me
just had
started.
the
Yeah,
equinox.
no, it's so
Right?
weird. Gets weirder and weirder time every year. But yes, we are at the end of October. This is actually a somewhat full week. You know, this has been a different kind of month with a lot of smaller, annoying, healing, challenging personal planet stuff that I don't generally talk about here on the podcast. But we got a full moon tomorrow. We got Mercury starting its shadow. Neptune is coming back into Pisces. And there's a yummy thing that happens at the end of the month, starting like on the 23rd, that I'm going to talk about today. But we're going to start with a question. So this is a question from I don't know, because I when questions come in, I put them all in a file, right? And I keep the name and email address, but it's in a file, not the email. And so I guess I didn't copy the name. So hello, if you asked this question, I really liked it. And this is for you. Dear Dr. Lennox, you are amazing. See, that's why I wanted to answer, because she says, amazing. I love how you blend astrology and psychology, making it so much more grounded and comprehensive. Plus, you're such a joy. Speaking of joy, I'm so happy. Oh, yeah, okay. You're about to cover yods in an upcoming podcast. Okay, so this is a couple of weeks back when I hinted at the yod conversation. Here's the thing. Even though I don't fully understand their significance yet, I recently discovered the prenatal solar eclipse, past life gifts with a question mark. Can you tell us more about that and how to work with them? So this is an interesting sort of idea about astrology, that the eclipses that you go through while you're in the womb are incredibly important to what the life is going to be. And if you sort of manage to be in the womb for 2 eclipses, which can happen depending on when you're conceived, the first one doesn't count. It's just too early. And then the idea being you're not attached yet. Soul is out there hovering. Body doesn't exist yet in form enough to attach the soul to the body. Astrology is very clear about when life begins, just like the Christian Bible says that life begins at first breath, but eclipses are transformative. They are incredibly powerful about portending future events. And when you do take your first breath, they land in your chart. The nodes of the moon land in your chart as representing your karma and your dharma. But the nodes of the moon are also where eclipse happens. So the prenatal eclipse is going to have the sign that your nodes are in already sort of established. And so that's the moment when astrology considers the soul to attach to the body, then therefore the idea of your karma dharma, your sort of life purpose, your sense of who you're choosing to come through knits together at that time. So it's like a threshold between worlds in a way. It's a very mystical idea. So it's like the portal of intention that you come through. So the solar eclipse is tied to your dharma, your life purpose. So it's your outward expression of your soul's journey, what you're here for. The lunar eclipse that happens in the womb is more about your karmic experience. What brought you to this life? What are you bringing with you? even if you don't vibe with like the idea of past lives, we enter with qualities and abilities that are natural to us, that don't have anything to do with what our environment is going to shape us as. Like when the moon's in Capricorn, my South Node, that's when I sing the best. So my intonation is the best, my best control, my best improvisation ability, because I came in with that South Node. So the eclipses you look at that took place while you were in the womb, not only will they describe your dharmic purpose and your karmic, gifts and challenges, how that chart is set up, the eclipse chart itself can be interpreted to reflect how that soul's, joining moment will reflect the life that's to come. Kind of like just reading a birth chart. Like saying, here's the birth chart of your karma, here's the birth chart of your dharma. So you can think of this as your soul's contract moment. And one of the best things to do is to consider the planet that rules the sign that is your South Node or your North Node. Because that planet's consciousness might also give layers, right? Capricorn South Node for me, Saturn ruled. That gives me a layer of my sort of karmic work that I had to do. And how do you work with it now? Like if you're advanced enough to like really dive into the chart and let the astrology speak to you, great. If not, meditate. Meditate on the sign. Meditate on the house it fit into. Meditate on these avatars that are archetypal, ideas that reflect your karma and dharma, and let your active imagination reveal some stuff that's, ready to come through your unconscious. You might track eclipses that occur at similar degree points. I mean, like same degree points, not like, similar, because those eclipses will be key. You can certainly sit down and geek out on eclipses like I did when I first started working with this idea 25, 30 years ago. But that's another way to just sort of see how your prenatal eclipse might relate to key moments in your life past and therefore life future, if you feel so inclined to do that. Journal about it, write about it, all the active imagination ideas, which means you connect to something that maybe you're writing about, but then you let your unconscious join the process and let yourself be surprised by the things you write. And there you have it. Have at it.
So there's more astrology activity this week. I know we had like a couple quiet weeks.
Yeah, absolutely, because we start out with our next new moon. I mean, we're literally at the precipice of the old lunar cycle we're coming out of. And tomorrow, in like wee hours of the morning, about 4:25 a.m. Pacific, the sun and the moon gather at 28 degrees of Libra, kicking off our next lunar cycle, of course, but also what I spoke about, I think, last week, about the idea that the full moon of this cycle won't have the sun in Libra, right? So we start with the Libra archetype governing what the whole lunar cycle is going to look and feel like based on the chart that I'm looking at right now. But then in that lunar cycle, we're diving into a deeper place in consciousness where actually all things are way more intense, Scorpio. But we're going to be, this is very subtle energy. We're going to be in the peaceful, balanced, harmonious, relationship-driven lunar cycle kicked off by a new moon in Libra. We're going to go looking at what's below, what's more intense, what's more unconscious at the full moon. I'll be saying more about this each month when we pass through this. It's just something that happens every, a bunch of months like this, a bunch of months where it's, typical, where we new moon and full moon have the sun in the same sign. That's like a side note. So right after Libra, the peace and harmony of balance, we dive into Pluto's ruled sign of Scorpio, where, in Libra, we're like, all is well right here, right now. We are in harmony and balance. And Scorpio says, oh, a little death, please.
Seasonal depression.
Well, yeah, that's in there. So it is a Libra new moon, so we do want to be in consideration of relationship desires, balance and harmony desires, right? You just mentioned seasonal depression, so there can be an intention to sort of find the higher top of the wheel this season instead of being, pulled under by, very real seasonal changes in your chemistry. Of course, look at the Libra house in your natal chart as well for distinctions, because that house's consciousness is sort of where your psyche is ready to start a new cycle. Now, this new moon forms a square with Pluto. Pluto, who has just turned around and gone direct. This is the only 2 years you'll hear me talk this much about Pluto going retrograde or direct. But the fact that he has gone direct means that the sort of march that this year and next year is towards more deep change. This is one of those new moon moments where, remember what I said just a few minutes ago about the idea of slipping from a peace and harmony lunar cycle into the consciousness of death and rebirth, change and transformation, Scorpio, Sun in Scorpio. Then the fact that the new moon is squaring Pluto, the ruler of Scorpio, tells us that indeed this lunar cycle isn't just about kicking off a peace, balance, and harmony thread. It's also going to demand more change and transformation, death and rebirth, because we're just not outside of that as a theme for these 2 years. It also might mean that the week gets a rough start with power struggles and things that we have to face in terms of, shadow and hidden things we didn't know. But even that energy is built into this new moon because we do want to be able to, set the sweet intentions and have a willingness to die for them. Of course, I'm speaking metaphorically also, but I mean it in terms of the hyperbole. The new moon opposes Chiron. This new moon opposes Chiron in Aries. The orb is 4 degrees. That's tight enough for me in this new moon. So orb means that the moons and the sun are at 28 and Chiron is at 24, and that's not a perfect 180 degree, but we call it good enough because it's only 4 degrees off a perfect opposition, and that's what we mean by orb of influence. You just learned something new. Now, you might learn something new about this, because Chiron has 2 different ways that he works, and I want to make sure you are aware of both of them because this lunar cycle might feature both ways that Chiron guides us along the way. Everybody's familiar with Chiron as the wounded healer, the consciousness of, oh yes, we've got to lean back in to the painful wound consciousness in order to relive it and heal it and move on. And Chiron knows exactly how that works. Chiron is a centaur who guides us through the woods from this perspective. When we meet Chiron along the woods of our journey, it means that we are ready to go into some painful, tender territory in order to have a deep release and a healing. But this is not really Chiron's primary directive. It's the artifact of what he has to do in order for us to meet his primary directive. The primary directive is that we learn how to master the mysterious ways that life unfolds here on Earth. So he knows how to work with the lunar cycle. He knows how to work with intuition and psychic phenomena. He knows how to work with ritual and ceremony and plant medicine and all of the mystery that exists here that lets us take the most advantage of working with energy that we can't really see, but that's everything about how we move through life. And my sense is the reason why he's the wounded healer is that primary directive. We can't do that as individuals terribly fully unless we're free of wound. Now, it's not black and white and absolute, but it's like this. It's like a channel of energy and intelligence that we tap into. It has to go through the same sort of tube that wounded plaque is gunking up. And so, yeah, there'll just be less flow of your ability to connect to Chiron's great wisdom of how to be here in the mystery. And so Chiron will spend a lot of time earlier in your life, certainly, helping clear that gunk so that the flow can increase. Because this is an opposition, something has to happen. That's the nature of 180 degrees. It's the only angle, in fact, that enforces or ensures that something's going to happen. Two moving objects through space at an opposition have to relate. They have to dance, they have to swerve, they have to crash, something. And so this new moon will meet you right where you're at in your chironic journey. And part of your job is to let the sadnesses come and cleanse and clear, and then know that that's the same sort of intention of lifting up your inner wisdom as you move through this lunar cycle. But the real juice of this new moon is the yod. And so maybe who knows, maybe I said something about, I don't know what I say week to week, and I don't listen to the pod. I did in the beginning, it made me insane. But there's an incredibly powerful yod built by the new moon at the pointy end. That's incredible. That means the navigating fork in the road, small change that's greeted by the winds of fate or the winds of God, which is what a yod is. The fact that it's the moon and the sun at the end that represents, the action, the activity, that's tailor-made. So the intentions we set become the behavioral activity that the yod is reflecting. Now, what makes a yod is that whatever pointy end is holding, space up front, sun and the moon in this case, there needs to be across the sky, sort of opposite a sextile, right? Two planets have to be working together like the motor of the motorboat that the pointy end is, directing us towards. And in this case, it's Uranus at 0 degrees of Gemini and Neptune, who's still in Aries, at 0 degrees. Talk about a motor. I mean, that's the inspiration of Neptune, which is all the inspiration that there is, and the capacity to move fast, to be excited by sudden change. Uranus in Gemini means those sudden changes that are exciting are also about like connecting and ideas and new thoughts and ideas that are lit up by our inspiration on fire and air. So it's like a combustible engine where the new moon is pointing us where we set intentions to go. And then this powerful motor offers, the fuel that we might need. Now, what's fascinating is the day after this new moon, the 22nd, Wednesday, Neptune moves back into Pisces the next day. So like if we anthropomorphized the planets, which I always do to help sort of symbolically represent an idea, it's like Uranus is saying, hey, stick around just another second. I need you here for another day. And Neptune says, well, I can do that. So that while we need it, we've got the fire of Neptune and Aries baked into the new moon intentions. And then the very next day, our inspiration goes back to the place where we can tap into it through our unconscious. He's in his ruling sign, after this, right? So think of setting intentions that Uranus accelerates because that's what Uranus does. Neptune lights a fire in you and then goes right to the place where all new things emanate from, the unconscious mind represented by Pisces. So I love that little elegant shift that Neptune's doing. And it's also important for y'all to know that Neptune returns to Pisces for the next bunch of months. He will turn around here when his retrograde is over. And then next year, we get the hot summer, only like, most all year long. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're still now. It is. It's going to be interesting on the world stage to see what happens when Neptune moves back into Pisces. There were some things brewing last week that looked like, some ceasefire energy and sort of diminishing I keep overusing this word, the fire. But don't expect too much, just a slight shift. So even that idea that, war in the Middle East, war in the Middle East, war in the Middle East, possibility of different thing happening in the Middle East, just as Neptune's getting ready to go back into Pisces. So back to the new moon and making, sure that we have that fire from Neptune. One of the things that makes a yod even more powerful is if there's a point or planet opposing the pointy end. See, the sextile is 150 degrees from the pointy end, each of them. So if there's something halfway in between the two sextiling planets, then the yod gets lifted up in its sophistication, has more power to move us in new directions from a kind of guided place. And of course, that's Chiron. So that's sort of why I presented it all in the way that I did, so that you understand, without trying to, put any pressure or fear. Just like I've been speaking about, it's important to be, in a spiritual practice to get through these couple of years, or Jesus, I don't know how you're going to do it. Similarly, here, you really want to dial in and dig deep so that you don't set intentions in a peaceful consciousness without also accepting that we are not in a peaceful moment. So nothing you intend can unfold without the gravitas of change and war and revolution. And this is kind of like a new moon where we get to say yes to peace and yes to the intensity we might have to go through to get there. Now, also happening on Tuesday, right there with the new moon, is Mercury enters his next retrograde cycle. Now, there's value in this for us. Most, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly how to say what I mean. Most plans or ideas or things you intend, if they have any sort of size and scope, they're going to take a while to play out, right? It's not a 28-day thing, and it's like, I want to grow something in 14 days. I want to eat it and then start again. So if you're diving into deep intentions, we will all benefit that Mercury's going to sort of do a little backward journey in November so that we have a mental, intellectual process that will take us all the way through the end of the year that starts with this new moon moment. So this is sort of like another way that we want to look at the new moon as a kind of, not more important, but it has greater importance because of what we've already talked about, and also a Mercury retrograde cycle being knitted into the very day that we move through a new moon. Now, Mercury's in Scorpio right now. When I get to the last segment of this podcast episode, I think you're going to be very, very happy about some things that Mercury is doing in the last week of October. But understand that because he's starting a retrograde in Scorpio. That means he's going to move 6 degrees into Sagittarius, and he's going to want to go back to Scorpio where the sun will be. It's the idea that there's a commonality in theme of a new moon where the sun moves into Scorpio 2 days later, while a retrograde with Mercury that started with that new moon in the second week of November, he turns around and will head back into Scorpio as part of his retrograde. In terms of the wide view, the dates of the 3 parts of his retrograde, the retrograde shadow, meaning he's moving, forward, but he's going to retrograde back to this territory, starts on Tuesday and goes through November 9th. The backward motion is November 9th through the 29th. And then the last act, the direct station, the direct shadow, where he's moving direct now again, but shadowing where he's been. And that goes through December 16th. And this is the first year in a couple of years where we're not in the middle of a retrograde cycle when the year turns, because that's been the case for the last couple of years. And I always think that's a little discombobulating because we have a psyche of new at January that our like bodies know about. And I just think that Mercury involved in an inward process while we're crossing the year is, let me say it this way, I think not having that will make this year's crossing a little less befuddling. Now, the last Mercury retrograde that we went through this summer was this weird, rare phenomenon of Mercury not making any triple transits to any of the planets in the solar system. I'm not even sure that I've ever seen that before. But this is not the case for this one. So these are the transits that hit 3 times in each of the sections of the retrograde. And the transits together tell like the overarching story. And certainly part of that overarching story is Sag is where Mercury's not happy. It's too many details and stimulation, and he gets a little overwhelmed. But it's also a sign of blunt truth. Like Sag is where we just tell the truth no matter what. Scorpio is where we know to keep some things in, to have a couple of secrets, to maybe have a little room where you put angry, awful things that you want to say, but you hold them back for the sake of like peace. So there's some theme about that. It could be the opposite too, that you have to go back into the cauldron of Scorpio to let how you communicate die and be reborn so that you can speak up more powerfully if that's a challenge for you with, the Sag part. There's an opposition from Mercury to Uranus that will happen 3 times, which means there's like excitement, sudden conversations that may come out of nowhere that might be important and change things a little bit. Uranus is also of the mind. Mercury and Uranus have an octave relationship. So Mercury is mind in our personal life, and Uranus is the higher octave of the mind. So that opposition could also be forcing, ideas to drop from your higher self into your, lower self and use that destabilization that might come to do some good work, which might just be letting go of some old wounds because Mercury is going to inconjunct Chiron for 3 times. So sudden insights that help you leave some old wounded consciousness behind. But now we've got this gorgeous thing to talk about that's knitted into the retrograde cycle, but also sort of governs how we're going to experience most of the last week of this month. So Mercury in his cycle, so just talk about that as a separate thing, then we'll push him to the back of the line. He will trine Jupiter, Saturn, and Neptune. So that means that our mind is going to be marinating in expansiveness, abundance, and prosperity consciousness, the idea of getting bigger, but from a joyful place, not an overvaluing place. Trining Saturn means like we're guided to move slow and steady and build from a kind of structural place that can last. And then a trine with Neptune is about making sure that everything we're thinking and saying and sharing from an idea perspective is dialed into our sense of spiritual practice, creative inspiration, because that's also Neptune's bailiwick. So lots of creative inspiration for writing and mental stuff. So this retrograde tells a very succinct story. So use the new moon to set yourself on a new path that you know will bring you more peace. And then both the sun and Mercury are going to tell you how intense it's going to be to like make things occur, but the raw materials are there. But like the times, everything's going to be a little more explosive than maybe ever before in our lives.
I love how that's just always a part of it.
There was, yet again, someone who sort of came into my social media space to talk about like negative and doom and gloom. And I was like, oh, honey, if you're finding me negative and doom and gloomy, you poor thing, because I think of myself as, optimistic. All right, let's talk about this grand water trine that is so yummy. And we got to start by just mentioning Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter is what we call exalted in Cancer. This comes from Babylon, where there was, I guess they just had these demarcations that we don't have, but we still borrow them. I like the idea that Jupiter, the planet of manifestation, while in the sign of birth and gestation, or I guess I should have said gestation and birth, that to me is a perfect setting for that planet to shine. So we start with saying that this whole sort of second part of the year and into next year has this benefit, that we get to feel into, which is that the planet that brings the best yummy is in a place where he can bring the bestest of the yummiest. He's also stationing, not directly. In other words, he hasn't stopped moving because he's going to turn around and go direct. He's still going to move to like 25 degrees, maybe even 26 before turning around, but he's moving slower than typical, but still direct. That's important for the beauty of what I'm describing to you right now, because direct is more outward than inward. And we love when Jupiter's saying, the cash and prizes out there might be coming your way. So while Jupiter's holding one corner of the Grand Trine, the Pisces corner has the North Node, Saturn, and Neptune, all in Pisces. Neptune is now in Pisces, of course, because he turned around and went in there on Tuesday. Jupiter's direct, but Saturn and Neptune are retrograde. What I love about that is I already talked about Jupiter's directness being more, outwardly expansive for us, but the discipline that we need and the inspiration from the divine that we need are both facing inward and in the sign that represents the unconscious. So there's this setup from these two corners of the trine that if some things should be rising up as potentially expansive or new, or that you've manifested, or that is rising up in this last week in October, the forward movement of the yummy stuff is doubly sort of foundational, because it's built on top of Saturn's capacity to build structure, and it's inspiring because Neptune is there filling us with, is there a synonym for inspiration? Because I'm tired of using that word.
Joy?
Yeah,
I don't know. Joy, it's not a
yeah, it doesn't matter. Just know that Neptune helps us put ideas out into the world because they need to be there, and sometimes it happens through us, and we call that inspiration. Now, it's the Scorpio corner. that makes this grand trine what it is and directly impacting us at the personal level. So this moment that sort of kicks off a handful of days of a beautiful, expansive energy hits only 2 days after the new moon, right? And it hits on the first day that the Scorpio mansion begins, or maybe it's the next day in terms of the exact timing of it. But the fact that Mercury is in an exact trine with Jupiter and then a loose trine, good enough for the girl's eye, with Saturn and Neptune, that is not only wonderful for this energy of a manifestation vortex in the feminine creative energy of water, and whatever we're thinking about, talking about, and working our minds through at this last week in October, we'll also then have the Mercury retrograde as legs to shift and work on things, refine and define. So it's wonderful that not only Mercury is participating in this grand water trine, but that he's going to stay in Scorpio for a while. We will benefit from that. Now, it's Mars that's making this a kind of embodied experience, right? It's not etheric or abstract if the planet that represents our walk through life is involved. Mars is at 21 degrees of Scorpio. So that means that as Mars moves from 21 Scorpio all the way through the end at 29 Scorpio, where he will trine Neptune, that means that the whole yummy energy that we're talking about that kind of starts on the 27th kind of goes through early November. So now if you take the fact that Mercury's in Scorpio and Mars is in Scorpio, what does that tell us about this yummy trine? It means that our walk and our talk are in alignment. And of course, the sign means that we're walking and talking right into the place where the deepest change takes place. And not for nothing, Pluto's ruling sign, and Pluto's leading all of the change that's happening this decade. Now, if that weren't juicy enough for you, Black Moon Lilith is right there at 23 degrees of Scorpio as well, which then also has a layer of meaning for us. You know, Black Moon Lilith is power, like powerful power, because it's the feminine principle power. Not the disarmed feminine principle that the patriarchy created, but the feminine principle that understands that creation and destruction are the domain of the feminine. Black Moon Lilith is also what we shove down, what we're ashamed of, what we don't want to look at, that we ultimately have to, because the shadow demands to be examined, or it will just continue to run you. I feel like I'm talking about this as if it's like a new moon, and it's not, though it's right at the top of a lunar cycle. That, means it's part of the new moon experience. But here's the thing that makes the new moon connect to this powerfully, I guess, would be that the moon will be in Scorpio on the 23rd. So like mid-morning Pacific time on the 23rd, the moon will be at 24 degrees of Scorpio, creating an exact trine with Jupiter. So what that means is, A, the new moon energy is very much part of this moment, because that conjunction not only happens so close to the new moon, but that conjunction happens as the sun is dropping into Scorpio, such that it's the energy of the cycle, really, is that Scorpio intensity. But the moon being there exactly at the place where the juice is one of those precision moments that I love so much. But understand that when the moon participates in something like that, it usually means an event. More importantly, for us, I'm not predicting some, wild event on the 23rd. I don't do that, and I don't think this is for that. It's water energy. So what it definitely indicates is So pull your thoughts back from what might happen out there to what's happening like in here. And know that the moon being activating right there at 24 Scorpio is what will take this energy of the pattern and stick it right into the unconscious of all of us. That's what the moon does. And the moon being with the walk and talk personal planets, and then deeply inside of us through Black Moon Lilith, this pattern really is being imprinted upon us in a way that we can carry it forward as a new sense of what's possible. I mean, you gotta figure that out against a backdrop of a world that is frightening. Remember that now that we're gonna be in Scorpio Mansion from the 22nd on, that the whole next 4 weeks are gonna be about wrapping up towards the end of the year, the principle of death, and as things diminish, there's a promise of return in spring. My prayer for all of us is that all of this Scorpio energy helps us transform how we're perceiving a scary world so that we can be of better service. Have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com. All right, it's dream segment time. Every week, Dr. Michael will interpret dreams that are sent in via email or take a live caller. If you would like your dream interpreted on the podcast, you can go ahead and email us at dreams@michaellennox.com. Hopefully your dream will make it onto the show. This week we have an email and dream from Maureen. This one's a blast from the past. As you know, if you've sent in a dream, I just let you know, hey, we have a backlog.
Oh God, do we
I'm
ever.
reading this, taking it into consideration, but we only have, we only read one dream per week. So this one's from the past. And Maureen says, hello, let me just say I love your podcast and look forward to listening to it every Monday morning.
Yay. Thank you.
You and Zoe rock the start of my week. She says, I am a regular dreamer and often write them down in the morning. Most are pretty long, convoluted, sometimes funny, and sometimes spiritual. Last week, I heard 3 distinct knocks in a dream.
Oh.
I have no idea what I was dreaming before that, if anything, but I woke up instantly after the knocks. I know they weren't real knocks because the dogs in bed with me didn't freak out.
Right.
I Googled it immediately. Some said it was thunder brain noise or whatever they call it, but nope. I've had that before. These were definitely knocks. Then I read where it meant I was going to die. And bad spirits were looking for me. Thanks, Google.
Also not
that
accurate.
creeped me the F out.
Yeah,
so I decided to ask you, if indeed I'm going to die or bad spirits are trying to find me, I'd rather hear it from you and not a random article.
Well, so this is from the past. Did you check to see? What if Maureen's dead?
Oh my God, no.
Maureen, I know you're not dead because dreams don't work that way. You know what works that way? Superstition. Right? And what is superstition? Superstition rises up out of ignorance, things that we don't know about. Like, and so, life was very mysterious for a very long time to us humans. And so ideas about what we didn't know would create superstitious sort of tropes. And what's one of the things that's mysterious? Dreams. So if
Totally.
superstitions are the sort of hobgoblin of, here's a good one, of Chiron's domain, right? If Chiron had been around back then, he wasn't discovered till 1977, but if Chiron had been around in, Middle Age Europe in the, hundreds of years ago, we wouldn't have had those superstitions. We would have understood, the spirit world a little bit more directly. Anyway, I'm homing back from Chiron. I also believe that dreams are for us always.
Yes.
So, like, if a knock is being characterized somewhere that demons are trying to get in, the idea that they're knocking at your door, I don't believe dreams can do that, because I believe with every fiber of my being that dreams are for us, never against us. Mm-hmm. They're not warning you of demons on the way. It has to be something knocking at the door that is beneficial and helpful. Mm-hmm. Even if it's change at the level of death and rebirth. But it ain't like literal death, because this is not possible. I'm reminded of so many ideas about knocking, Death knocks on your door. That's a trope.
Okay, well, that goes to that's a point for a
right, but it's dream, so it's never going to be literal death. It's always going to be change is knocking at the door. Who you are, what your world has been is going to change as you open the door to this knocking. So, always for us, never against us. Luck, opportunity knocks. That's another thing that knocks.
That's true.
I'm thinking of, young Frankenstein, and he says, "What knockers?" And she says, "Thank you." I'm also thinking of, I'm a kid from the 70s, and Tony Orlando and Dawn had big pop tune in the 70s that went, "Knock 3 times on the ceiling if you want me, ba-da, ba-da, twice on the pipes, if the answer is no." So it's about hooking up.
Oh.
Knock if you want me, bang the pipes if not. But even there, I'm being cute when I mention the song, but I am the one receiving the dream, and that lives inside of me, so I share it not as a projection, but as yet another example where knocking 3 times is about something beneficial. Mm-hmm. Even the waking up instantaneously feels to me on purpose in a way. Right, that there's an urgency to this knocking. It's not a knock, Maureen, that you can afford to not answer. And I would also say that, even though she sent this in a long time ago, that if this is about something she has to answer, she ipso facto has, in fact, right? The dream is a snapshot of something that's calling her forward. Whether it's an internal psychic change or the readiness internally to meet a change that's brewing on the outside world. What else did she talk about? That sometimes her dreams are spiritual, but sometimes they're...
She was saying that her dreams are usually long, convoluted, sometimes funny, and sometimes spiritual.
Okay. I wasn't sure why I was asking, but now I know why I'm asking, right? That this is a dream apart. Right, so this is more dream experience than dream.
Yes.
How do we know that? We know what her vocabulary is.
She doesn't remember the dream before the knocks, but she's really vividly remembers.
And it's really, really, really short with one little message. So that means it can't be typical of her, because now we know how she dreams. So it's important. Now, Maureen, if you're hearing this, I hope you're still listening, I would invite you to go back to that time that you had the dream and then look at the months that followed and see if there's some way you can sort of point to that moment as some kind of an initiation. And if that sounds like a big hyperbolic word, it might be a big initiation, but it might have also been like a new habit that wants to be born that will be better for your health. Mm-hmm. Just making stuff up here. But either way, something's knocking on your door, honey, and I kind of want to hear about it. So maybe write us a follow-up email, and everybody have at it.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.